Welcome csc200 class, and I'm going to review installing AMPS. AMPS is described as a software stack of Apache, MySQL, PHP, Perl, Python, and Softaculous software. Now what that means is you're going to be running a virtual server. So it's not a server that's up on the web or in the cloud, it's going to be a server on your computer where you could do things like interact with a database and work with PHP and even do WordPress installs. So we're going to download that right now. And I'm at amps.com. There's two P's, one M, ampps.com. And I'm going to click on download AMPS. And they have versions for Mac and Windows and Linux. And they just have a new version of Mac that just came out in November for the 64-bit Mac. And I'm going to do Windows right now since most of you are probably working on Windows and I haven't done a Windows install yet. So I'm going to download it right here, the 64-bit Windows version. And I'll wait for that to download. By the way, I'm running my Windows in VirtualBox instead of Parallels because it's free, so I'm trying it out, so we'll see how this works. And it looks like my AMPS executable file has downloaded, so I'm going to double click on it. And I'm going to allow it to install. And they have a wizard that comes up, so I'll just follow the wizard, and I'll accept everything without reading it. And it's going to put it right on your C drive and program files. And that's important to know because our local host or main server is going to be in that file, so you could leave it right there. And desktop icon, quick launch icon, I guess I could leave that for now. You could always remove them. And I'll run the install. And the install is finishing up. It took about a minute, maybe 2 minutes at the most. Took a little while. And we're all done here. And it's asking about a Microsoft Visual C++. I don't think we're going to necessarily use that, so I'm going to X out of that for now. And I'll launch AMPS. And all you'll see come up is kind of like a little box at the bottom of the page. It isn't going to take up your full screen, and it's going to eventually start running Apache server and PHP and MySQL. Might take a little while to get started. And if you see anything like this with Windows Defender, just allow access. And what you want to see over here is everything running. And I'll go over more of this, but just to get it installed, what you want to look at first is if we click on this thing, this is the local host. That will point us to our main server. And if I click on there, the first thing that may come up is Secure AMPS, and you don't necessarily have to check this in Secure AMPS, so I'm just going to hit Submit. And you'll see all kinds of settings here and all kinds of installs, and we'll go over setting up our MySQL and things like that. But for now, all I want to do is just go back to localhost because our server is going to be named localhost. So if I go back here and highlight this and delete that and just leave us at localhost, that'll be our main file. And this is what's here by default. Now, where this is at, just so you know where this is at, because this is important, if you go to your files, your file explorer, and you go to, let's see, on here, I'm on this PC, I'm on localhost, and then I'm going to go into program files, and I'm going to look for AMPS, which will be up here at the top. And in that folder, at the bottom here, is going to be a folder called www right here. And that's going to be our main server area. So if you go in here, that's why I'm seeing CGI bin error Favicon. Favicon is basically the little icon. It's this little icon that's showing up there. These are the files that we're seeing, so we can't really see anything right now. There's error messages and things like that, so there's nothing to see right now. This is where we're going to put our files that's going to act like our web server, so it's kind of empty right now. Now, if you wanted to check things out, I'll just mention one thing that you could do to get started. If you open up Visual Studio Code, assuming you already installed Visual Studio Code, I'm going to launch that right now. And a couple things with Visual Studio Code, you can open a folder and work inside a folder, and you can also create a workspace, which is like a pointer to your folder. Let's do this first. That way you can see both. I'm going to open folder. And what I'm going to do is go to that folder that I just showed you. And if you remember, you have to go to your program files on your local disk inside the AMPS folder. And you're going to look for that www folder. And you're going to select that folder. That's going to be our main folder, that www folder. And you can't change the name on it, at least for now. I tried to do it, and there's some issues with doing that. So just leave it as www. And when you see it in your browser, it'll either be the IP address 127.0.0.1, or it'll be localhost. So we're just going to select that as a folder right now. And that'll be like our main directory. And you can see it's saying www, and these are the files that are in it right now, which we're not going to use. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a new file. Actually, we'll make a new folder. There's icons right here. I'll make a new folder, and I'll just call it test, because that's all we're going to do is test it. And then inside there, I'll open this up, and I'll make a new file. And I'll just call it index.php, because we're just going to do a test to make sure that we could run a PHP file. And I can see that that's inside there. And there's nothing in our index.php. So what are we going to put in there? Well, just to start, let's go to W3 Schools. We're going to be using this for SQL and PHP stuff. So I'm going to go to W3 Schools. And this will be a quick way to just get some code that we could test things out. So I'm going to go to the PHP tutorial in W3 Schools. And W3 Schools is great for web stuff, and PHP, we'll use it for SQL commands as well. It's a great resource. And I'm just going to go to PHP Syntax just to get some code to try out. And things are running a little slow on my virtual server, and I'll go down here, and here's some code. Here's some example code. Now it has try it yourself, but this code should be fine. If you want to go into the try it yourself, you could find the actual code, but you could copy it right off the front. Here's my PHP code, and you can see there's a little block of PHP in here. It has the tag and the PHP symbol and a question mark, and it ends with a question mark. That's PHP, and that can be inserted into HTML. So I'm going to highlight this whole block here and kind of make an HTML page, but it's going to be a PHP page. And I'm going to just copy it. And I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to paste in that code. And that's the PHP. And another bit of code I'm going to get as well, I'll put like a date time in here. So I'll go back to the web, and I'm going to go into PHP date time. Now again, we're just trying things out here, so this isn't a big deal. We're just going to copy a little code in here. And they have a date function. And I'm just going to scroll down here and just find a little bit of code. I'll even just highlight this one here, this first one. I'll highlight it right from here. It's just an echo line. Echo is kind of like a print function. And I'll copy that line of code, and I'll go back to Visual Studio Code. And I'll put it right here after the hello world. And I'm actually going to put the BR in here. Now notice this is a string, so I could put HTML code in here, and I don't need the BR at the end here. And notice it's concatenated with a dot because they have like a function here, and then they have some text or a string. Now we don't have that here. Basically the text and the HTML break is actually all part of a string, so we could leave it there. And I don't think I do need the quote there, so let me get rid of that quote, so that it ends with just the parentheses. So it should say hello world, and it should say today is, and it should run a date function to see what the date is. Now I have to save this first. So this little circle means it's not saved. When you see a little X, it means it is saved. So I'll just save it. That means that it's saved, and notice it's in my www folder. And what I'll do is I'll go back to Chrome, and remember this page here, I'll just refresh it. And I should see my test folder because we just put it in there. And if I click on here, if it's working, I should see hello world and the date. Now, if I had turned off, if I had gone back to amps, now where is amps? Amps isn't showing down here. Let me go down here. There's amps. It has this little color thing. So if I go back to amps, and for whatever reason, if I turn this stuff off, and I stopped my server, basically I turned off my server and I refreshed it, I'll get a message that the site can't be reached. Because we don't have a server active, it can't process the PHP. So without being able to do that, we can't see anything. That's why you can't just work on PHP locally. You have to use something like this, kind of a virtual environment, so it could process the PHP code, because it's more of a back-end code. It's not a front-end code like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So to get that running again, I'll just go back here and make sure I go back to my amps and turn my server back on and get everything running again. And I guess this company is Softaculous, is the company that makes it. And now you can see I didn't even have to refresh, it came on again. So it's processing the PHP code. that we put in there that we got from W3 School. So it's working. So that's all we have to do is see that it's working, and I'll probably give you an assignment where you could just take a screenshot of this and put it in your comments and send it to me. So at least I know that you got your amps set up correctly. So there's not a whole lot to do with amps. As long as you get it set up and as long as you get your folder set up with Visual Studio Code, you should be fine. And one other thing I was going to mention here, we opened a folder called www, but what you can also do is you could click on this folder here and you could say File, and you could say Save Workspace As. And Workspace means it's kind of like an alias file or a special kind of pointer file that you could put anywhere. So you could keep all your workspaces in one place, like in your csc200 folder, and then that way you can get to it without having to dig into your amps folder or anything like that. So I could save my workspace, and it'll actually put this .code-workspace after it. And one thing I just want to point out, in case you didn't do this yet, and I think I already did, but if you go into folder options on Windows, or File Explorer options it might call it, used to call it folder options, make sure under View that you uncheck Hide Extensions for known file types, because we always want to see our extensions. We want to make sure that they're SQL files or PHP files or HTML files. So don't let Windows hide those extensions. Uncheck that so you can see that. Now mine is unchecked, so that's the way you want it. So you want it unchecked. So I could just cancel out of here right now. And you could just call this www, or you can even call it localhost workspace, whatever you want to call it. You could put amps here if you want. Whatever you want to do. Now you don't have to put the extension, it'll put that in for you once it gets saved. But first of all, where would you save it? Well, you might want to save it in documents. Now I'm not sure if I have this set up yet, but you might have like a CSC, well I don't have one, so let me make a new folder just so I can demonstrate it. I'll make a folder called csc200, and I'll go inside here, and then I'll create this workspace in here. I could even make a folder called Workspaces to keep it separate, because maybe you'll have more than one workspace, but I'll just call it Workspaces. And then in here, this is where I'll save that workspace folder, and I'll hit Save. And here's my workspace, and it's showing my CGI bin, the error, and it's also showing this test folder in here. So everything's in here in this localhost workspace. So then whenever you want to get out of here, you can File, and you could close Workspace. And whenever you need to open up your workspace, you could just go to File, Open Workspace. And if you know that you have it not in your amps folder, but if you in your documents folder where you'll have other files for the class, you'll go into your csc200, go into your workspaces. But right now I'll just hit Open, and now I open up my workspace. And this is actually what it should look like. That way you could still see your www folder. The workspace name is called localhost amps, but the folder that we're in, the main folder that is part of that workspace, is called www. And everything's in here. And for this semester, everything that we do, we're going to keep in this www folder. We'll have tests, and we might have like EX1 and EX2 or EX whatever. We'll do some of our other exercises in Python Anywhere first, but then we'll do some of our exercises in here. And we'll keep things in their own exercise folder. So this first one's called test. So at least you could do that. And even if you put here, you could put, you could even put your name here. If you take a screenshot of it, I could put Rich's first PHP page, and then it shows hello world, that's PHP code. So that if I save this, if I do a Control S and save this, and then I go back to Chrome and I refresh it, I know that PHP is working, and I know that I did something to modify it, and I could even take a screenshot of this if you wanted to. Now, by the way, how would you take a screenshot? You could use something called Snipping Tool. If you ever wanted to take a screenshot of something, at least on Windows, I don't use Windows a whole lot, but you can make a new snip. And if you wanted to just prove that you did this, and there's my little snip, and then I could save this. I'll say File Save As, and I'll just call it test. I'll call it PHP test, and it's a .ping file. And I'll just save that back into my documents, and I'll put it into my csc200. Now I don't have this organized yet where I have files and notes and things like that. I'll show you how to do that, but since I'm doing some of these videos out of order than actually getting the course set up, I'll just save this in here right now. But that way you can send that to me in a comment. You could just insert it into a comment, and I'll show you how to do that once we have our my Warren set up. But that's a little PHP test. And if you want, you could go back to amps, and when you're done with amps, you could just close it up, and it'll say, are you sure you want to quit? And you'll hit yes. Now when you do quit, this thing won't be active anymore. If I refreshed it, this will go away, and it'll say you can't connect, and that's okay. And I could X out of here, and I can go to Visual Studio Code, and I can close my Workspace. You don't have to close it. You can just X out of here and it'll go back into your Workspace if that's where you're working. You could set up a Workspace for Python work if you're doing any of that as well. So I'm going to close this up right now, and that's all we need to do as far as setting up amps in your local environment. And again, for Mac, it's very easy as well. I can show you if you need any help doing that for the Mac, but it's pretty much the same thing, probably a little bit easier. So let me know if you have any questions with setting up amps.